the science that Mengele did, was it proper science, like proper reporting? I hate to talk about it in this sort of.
Yeah, he did. Actually, he did. He
did
kept
he do
detail.
a good job of it in a sense?
What
That's
he
a terrible
did,
word. Sorry about that if I offended anyone, but
he kept detailed records of everything he did. What he did and how he did it was horrific. Okay, I won't even go into the details because some people won't be able to withstand the visuals. But what he did to people, even without anesthesia, in order to expand his knowledge of human genetics, is astounding even by today's standards. Okay, it makes drawing and quartering look almost humane, and his notes became basically doctrine for a lot of the people wanting to pursue knowledge of the human genome, of the blood typing, breaking that down into the common DNA that we use today. Like you can do a DNA test. I did one just for laughs and gigs when my father was alive, and to see what we missed in the family tree. But it'll break down 20, 30 different countries that going back 5,000 years or so, that'll show you where all your ancestors came from because of the mitochondrial DNA. Well, Mengele was way ahead of the game on that because he wanted to break down human cells to find out, was there truly a Jewish blood? Was there an Aryan blood? He was doing these studies that sound insane. But then if you look at the DNA test people take, it's the great grandchild of that research.
So they had microscopes back then, but they didn't have gene sequencers. They didn't have maybe they had mass spectrometers.
No, they didn't have that either. No.
What did they have?
Well, basically, and this is not my area of expertise, but what they had was Mengele was able to separate cells using high-powered microscopes. He could separate cells and distinguish between ethnicities of people based upon certain results from those examinations. I'm not well versed enough in the medical field to be able to tell you what all that was. But I'll give you an example. He was able to apparently be able to tell from the blood drawn if someone was a Ukrainian or if someone was a Bulgarian.
That's crazy for that technology back then.
Okay. How he did that without using current mitochondrial DNA methods, I don't know. I have no idea. But he was a genius at that, but he was ruthless in his application of it. That's what got him in trouble. I mean, if people had walked into Auschwitz on their own and said, "Hey, do a blood test on me. I want to see, what you can find out." Then, oh, sure. But no, they brought them in, left, to the right, to the gas or to the work camp, or those of you who qualify, like twins and dwarves and other anomalies of the human experience, were brought into his laboratories, and they became lab rats. That's where he violated the laws of humanity and the laws of war.
Was he doing it out of a sadistic thing, or was it purely intellectual, just like psychotic intellectual?
No, he was strictly a pure scientist. He was not the kind, and I take this from the people I interviewed who knew him. I even interviewed his son, Rolf, and some of the SS men who knew him.
You met them or over the phone or?
No, I met him face to face. I met Rolf face to face. And so what Mengele was doing was pure science, ruthless science. There was no emotion and no compassion in his work. It was strictly the result by any means. Now, he would take certain children. This is strange about Mengele. He would take certain children, he would give them better food, candy, and put them in a nice place to stay. And he would do the experiments of blood tests and everything. And he would treat them very well. But after he was done with them and they were of no use, they went off to the gas chamber. So how you develop that mindset as a doctor, a medical doctor who takes the Hippocratic oath to do no harm, could even think of doing something like that, let alone.
It's just like lab rats. I've worked in medical laboratories. I've worked on mice brains at a certain point in my life. I decided that wasn't my career of choice, but they say like, oh, this rat's having a good life. This chicken's having a good life until it's time to have their to go and be done research on them, you know?
Yeah, well, that was Mengele's theory. You know, they're going to die anyway. Let's let them give them a little bit nicer life until the procedures are over, and then, you know, off you go.
And his son was, what was it like for his son once he realized what his father did, and when did he realize what his father did?
Rolf was a young child when the war ended, and his father escaped to South America, Argentina at first, and then later Paraguay. Then he died in Brazil. But and Rolf did manage to make a trip to South America to meet his father after many years. I think it was maybe 20 years later that he actually managed to, or 30 years, 70s. Yeah, 30 years after the war, he managed to go see his father face to face. And he knew about his father. I mean, the name Josef Mengele, I mean, even back in before the days of the internet, was internationally known. I was talking with Simon Wiesenthal, who was really wanting to get his hands on him. And Simon said that, yeah, you know, he knew about Rolf's travel and all this, that, and the other. But
who's Simon?
Simon Wiesenthal.
Who's that?
Well, Simon Wiesenthal was the most famous Nazi hunter in history.
Okay.
And he survived a couple of the camps. I believe Auschwitz was one, and I believe Belsen was the other, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, I worked with Simon on some research projects. He lived in Vienna, actually. I still remember his address. I think it was 13 Mozartstrasse. But he died a few years ago. His daughter now runs the organization, the Wiesenthal Center. But no, but the horrific nature of those crimes kind of rings true when you think about how it started. It all started in the 1930s with the T4 euthanasia program, where they would take the genetically inferior, the old, the feeble, the mentally ill, those with the extra chromosome issue, and they would put them in hospitals and inject them and kill them, and then send letters back to the families saying, "Oh, your child, son, daughter, father, mother died of pneumonia." And that way they were diluting society of those they considered unworthy of life. And then after the war started, of course, until that became detrimental, then of course they created the death camp operations with the gas chambers and the crematoria. Well, in the midst of all of that process, but the only thing that was not evolutionary was the medical experimentation, which had started in the mid 1930s. That was ongoing from day one until the end of the war. The only difference was that with the deportations and the trainloads of people coming into the death camps, that gave people like Mengele a lot more subject matter to work with.
So I'm just there's lots of threads here, but what was this? What was you want to take that? I can pause.
No.
So what was his son's reaction to meeting his dad?
Well, his son basically was horrified at what his father had been accused of doing, and he wanted to hear it from his father personally. And Rolf told me in the meeting that his father said, yes, there were things that we had to do. That those were our orders, and he was under orders from General Raschke in particular, that they wanted to find out information about how to create a more pure Aryan race, meaning could they convert brown-eyed people to blue-eyed people by injecting dyes into their eyes? Well, I mean, hey, this is, I know it sounds crazy, but you have to understand 50, 60, 70 years ago, people still believed in Darwinism with regard to the fact that there was a racial and intellectual difference between blacks, whites, Orientals. People based their prejudice upon what they believed to be a superior race. And until, of course, that was proven false by common sense above all other things. But they wanted to find out, can you change the genetic makeup of a human being to make them a more acceptable version that we would like to have in our society? And the only way to do that was to test their blood, test their marrow, test their teeth, whatever the hell it took, and do your experiments and see what you came up with. One thing about Mengele, though, I'll give him credit for one thing. He was an honest purveyor of knowledge. He didn't come to any predisposed suppositions. Everything was a hypothesis unless it was proven by science. And if he could prove something by science, then that was a victory. If it was a hypothesis that was unproven, then he wrote it out as such. So he was dedicated to finding truth. His method was extremely questionable.